I am 92 years old, and I have lived long enough to watch the world forget something very important. I have watched it forget how to eat well on almost nothing. I have watched it forget how to turn scraps into meals, how to feed yourself with dignity when money is tight, and how to find comfort in a single pot of soup. But before this knowledge disappears completely, I want to tell you something that changed my entire life. My grandmother, back in 1933, took one single chicken and stretched it into 7 days of food for our family of 5. She never threw away a bone, not one. She never wasted a carrot top or a crust of bread. And at 92 years old, I can tell you that what she knew then was decades ahead of what doctors and scientists are saying right now. That is where I want to start, because your grandmother knew something that you need to know too. And if you are a senior living alone, what I am about to share with you is going to change how you eat and how you feel every single day. I grew up during the Depression. I remember the hunger, but I also remember something else. I remember that my grandmother never made us feel poor, not once. She made us feel taken care of. She made us feel like someone was paying attention, someone was planning, someone was thinking about tomorrow, that someone was her, and she did it with soup. Soup was not just food in those days. Soup was a way of saying I love you without spending money you did not have. Soup was a way of turning fear into comfort. It was survival wrapped in warmth. And the soups I am going to tell you about today, the 30 soups that kept entire generations alive on pennies a day, those soups are still here. They are waiting for you. They are waiting to teach you what my grandmother taught me. Let me take you back to the beginning. Picture a kitchen. It is 1933. There is almost nothing in it. A pot. A burner. A woman who will not let her family go hungry. She starts with water. Just water. But she does not stop there. She walks to where she kept the scraps. An onion end that would normally be thrown away. A pinch of salt. Whatever was in the icebox. Maybe a few potato peels, maybe a wilted celery stalk. Families in Appalachia and across the Dust Bowl were surviving entire weeks on this. We called it water soup. It sounds impossible, I know. It sounds like a joke. But it was real. It fed millions of us. The trick, and this is something you need to know right now, the trick was a single slice of stale bread. You would toast it until it was hard as a rock. Then you would lay it in the bottom of your bowl. The hot broth from above would soften that bread into something that felt like a real meal. The cost was almost nothing. For a senior living alone today, water soup is still a way to use every single thing before you have to go to the grocery store. Nothing wasted, nothing forgotten, everything used. My grandmother taught me that the things people threw away held more nutrition than anything people would pay for. She saved potato peels in a bowl of cold water. She would simmer them with an onion and a bay leaf until the broth turned thick and starchy. The peels would break down into something surprisingly creamy. If she had milk, a splash went in. If she could spare the butter, a small knob would melt into it. You see, what the scientists discovered much later, my grandmother already knew. Most of the vitamins in a potato live right under the skin, right exactly where she was eating them all along. She was never wrong. She was just ahead of her time. When I was young, before Chinese food arrived in the shopping centers, my mother made what we called egg drop soup. She would bring salted water to a rolling boil. Then she would beat one single egg. And slowly, very slowly, she would pour it through the tines of a fork into the swirling water. The egg would cook instantly into these delicate ribbons, a pinch of pepper, maybe some chopped scallion tops saved from last week, and in 5 minutes you had a meal with protein that cost less than a penny. A tired person eating alone at the kitchen table could feel nourished again. This is not just food, you understand. This is medicine. This is care. This is someone saying they are worth the 5 minutes of attention. And there was bread soup. Stale bread was like currency where I grew up. Nothing ever got thrown away. You would tear 2 or 3 slices of old bread into a pot, cover it with water or milk, add salt, a little butter if you had it. Simmer everything until it melted together into a thick porridge. Some families added a beaten egg. Others stirred in a spoonful of bacon dripping saved from breakfast. In the Pennsylvania Dutch communities, they called this milk soup, and children grew up thinking it was a treat. Imagine that. Children felt they were having something special because someone loved them enough to turn nothing into something. That is what my grandmother understood. For one person today, a few slices of day-old bread becomes a warm bowl of comfort in under 10 minutes. Bean bone soup was the foundation of Sunday dinners in my childhood. When a family finished a ham, the bone did not go to waste. It went straight into a pot with dried navy beans, a diced onion, salt, and water. That was the whole recipe. The bones would simmer for hours, releasing marrow and collagen into a broth so thick the spoon could almost stand up in it. A pound of dried beans cost 3 cents and made enough soup to last a single person nearly a week. The slow simmer filled small apartments with a smell that made loneliness feel a little less sharp. I can still smell it when I close my eyes. I can still feel the warmth of that bowl in my hands. Cabbage soup was our best friend. A whole head of cabbage cost a nickel during those years and could feed a person for 3 days. You would shred it. Add a diced onion. If you could get them, a can of tomatoes, salt, pepper, water. Simmer until the cabbage softened and turned sweet. Some people added a ham hock. Others dropped in a handful of rice or barley. The soup tasted better the second day as the flavors deepened overnight. That is something worth remembering. Good soup gets better with time. For a senior eating alone today, a single head of cabbage still stretches further than almost anything else you can buy in the produce section. There was Hoover stew, named, I will tell you, mockingly after President Hoover. This was the soup of the desperate. Hot dogs sliced thin, a can of stewed tomatoes, a can of corn, cooked macaroni, everything dumped into one pot. The shanty towns that people called Hoovervilles served this by the ladle full to men who had lost everything. It was filling. It was cheap. It required no skill whatsoever. A senior living alone can make a full pot for under $3 today. It keeps in the refrigerator for 4 days. Not elegant, but honest, warm, ready when you need it. And that is enough. Onion soup. Not the fancy French kind with the broiled cheese crust that you see in restaurants. The Depression version was simpler, and I will tell you, arguably better. You would slice 4 or 5 onions thin, cook them slowly in butter or bacon grease until they turned deep brown, almost caramelized. Then you would add water, salt, a crust of stale bread torn into pieces. That long, slow browning created a sweetness and depth that no bouillon cube could ever match. The whole pot cost pennies. The smell of onions cooking low and slow in a quiet kitchen. That is one of the most comforting sounds a person living alone can hear. It says someone cares enough to take their time. It says you are worth the slow cooking. Before Campbell's soup came along and became the default in every American kitchen, every grandmother in America made tomato soup from real tomatoes, canned tomatoes, a little butter, a pinch of baking soda to cut the acid, salt, a splash of milk stirred in at the end. The baking soda trick, identical to what British housewives used, stopped that harsh, tiny bite without adding sugar. A can of tomatoes cost about 5 cents in 1935. The homemade version tastes nothing like the can, It tastes like someone cared enough to stand at the stove for 15 minutes. It tastes like love. Then there was what we called rivel soup. This Pennsylvania Dutch classic has almost completely disappeared. You make tiny flour dumplings by rubbing a simple dough of egg and flour between your fingers until pea-sized crumbles fall into simmering milk or broth. The rivels cook in 2 minutes, turning thin liquid into something hearty and satisfying. A cup of flour, 1 egg, a quart of milk. The whole pot costs almost nothing. The act of rubbing those little dumplings into the pot is meditative. It is the kind of slow kitchen work that gives a quiet evening purpose. It gives your hands something to do while your mind settles. Split pea soup was a staple of every Depression pantry. You needed a 1-pound bag of dried split peas, a leftover ham bone, a diced onion, a couple of carrots. Simmer for 2 hours, and the peas dissolve into a thick, mossy green soup that sticks to the ribs. No blender needed. The peas do the work themselves. By 1936, the government was distributing dried peas through relief programs because they were the cheapest source of protein available. For one person, a single batch lasts 4 or 5 days. It freezes beautifully, and the smell of split peas simmering on a winter afternoon can make a small kitchen feel like home. Before chemical lawn treatments turned every yard into a poisoned carpet, dandelion greens were free food. Depression families picked them from fields and roadsides every spring. You would sauté them with garlic and onion, then simmer them in water with a potato for body. Dandelion soup was bitter, earthy, packed with vitamins A and C. It cost nothing, literally nothing. Modern foragers have rediscovered what the Depression generation knew all along. The weeds growing in the cracks are sometimes the most nutritious thing available. And then there was potato soup, the king of Depression soups. Peel and dice 4 potatoes. Simmer them with an onion in salted water until soft. Mash roughly in the pot. Stir in a splash of milk, a pat of butter, salt and pepper. Done. This fed more American families during the 1930s than any other single recipe. The starch makes it creamy without cream. The simplicity made it possible on the worst days when energy was low and the kitchen felt too big for one person. A pot of potato soup and a piece of toast is a complete meal that costs less than $1 today. Corn chowder was something the Midwest families made when times were even slightly better. Sweet corn cut off the cob or poured from a can, simmered with diced potatoes, onion, and milk. A strip of bacon, fried crisp and crumbled on top, brightened the bowl when the budget allowed. Depression families grew their own corn and dried it for winter. The natural sugars in the corn gave the chowder a sweetness that children loved and old folks craved. For a senior cooking alone, a can of corn and 2 potatoes become a chowder rich enough to make the evening feel less empty. Mulligan's stew was born in hobo camps along the railroad lines. It was the original community soup. Everyone threw something into the pot: a carrot, a potato, a scrap of meat, a handful of beans. The rule was simple: you eat, you contribute. That concept came home with people and families across America adopted it. Clean out your refrigerator, dice everything small, simmer in water with salt and pepper. No recipe, no rules, just whatever you have made into something warm. For one person living alone, it is the best way to make sure nothing goes to waste. The United States Senate cafeteria has served navy bean soup every single day since 1903. That is not folklore. That is the congressional record. The recipe is almost absurdly simple: dried navy beans, water, smoked ham hocks, onion, butter, salt, pepper. Simmer until the beans are soft and the broth turns cloudy white. During the Depression, navy beans were distributed free through government surplus programs. A 1-pound bag fed a family for 3 days. The Senate still serves it because it still works. Cheap, filling, nutritious, deeply satisfying. Pepper pot soup is Philadelphia's signature soup, and it nearly vanished entirely. Tripe, the lining of a cow's stomach, simmered with potatoes, onions, celery, and crushed peppercorns in a rich broth. Legend says it fed Washington's army at Valley Forge. By the Depression, street vendors sold it from steaming carts for a nickel a bowl. Tripe cost almost nothing because most people would not touch it. But slow cooked in pepper pot, it turned silky and tender, the peppery broth warming you from the inside out. The vendors are gone now, but the recipe survives in old cookbooks, waiting for someone to remember. Lentil soup cooks faster than any other dried legume. No soaking required. 45 minutes from bag to bowl. During the Depression, families who could not afford the fuel for a long simmer relied on lentils when beans took too long. Diced carrots, celery, and onion. Celery, a can of tomatoes, a cup of brown lentils seasoned with salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. The lentils break down into a thick, almost meaty soup that needs nothing else. For a senior living alone, lentil soup is the fastest route from an empty stomach to a filling meal. One pot, one burner, less than an hour. There was vegetable scrap broth. During the Depression, housewives kept a bag or a bowl in the icebox. Every onion end, every carrot top, every celery leaf, potato peel, parsley stem went into it. When the bag was full, everything went into a pot with water and simmered for an hour. The result was a golden broth, richer than anything from a can or a cube. Strained and stored, it became the base for every soup that week. This habit, saving scraps for broth, is the single most useful cooking trick a person living alone can adopt. It turns waste into wealth. Chili bean soup was not Texas chili, not competition chili. This was Depression chili, 1 can of kidney beans, a diced onion, a spoonful of chili powder, water, maybe a can of tomatoes if the budget stretched, simmered until thick. Served with crackers or cornbread, chili powder was cheap, and it made bland beans taste like something worth sitting down for. WPA workers ate this from tin cups on road crews across the Southwest. For one person, a pot of chili bean soup lasts 3 days and reheats better each time. Cream of anything soup was the formula that Depression cooks invented and Campbell later packaged and sold for billions of dollars. Melt butter. Stir in flour. Add milk slowly, stirring until thick. Then add whatever vegetable you had. Celery, mushrooms, asparagus ends, potato. The white sauce base made anything taste rich and creamy. The technique takes 5 minutes to learn and works every single time. A senior living alone does not need 17 cans in the pantry. You need one recipe and whatever vegetable is on sale this week. Chicken foot soup taught me something profound. Chicken feet cost almost nothing because nobody wanted them. Depression cooks knew they were packed with collagen and gelatin that turned plain water into a thick, nourishing broth. Simmered for hours with onion, celery, salt, and peppercorns, chicken foot broth would set up like jelly when cooled. Modern science confirms what grandmothers already knew. The collagen in chicken feet supports joint health, gut lining, and skin elasticity. Exactly what seniors need most. Asian and Latin markets still sell chicken feet for pennies a pound. The secret never left those communities. Barley soup was the grain of the poor. A handful thrown into any soup pot would swell and thicken the broth, turning thin liquid into a meal that stuck with you for hours. Beef barley soup used the cheapest cuts, simmered until the meat shredded and the barley turned soft and chewy. A pound of pearl barley cost 3 cents during the Depression and lasted weeks. For a person eating alone, barley is the difference between broth and a meal. It absorbs flavor, it adds texture, it makes a small amount of meat go twice as far. Flour sack soup is something I never want to forget. When the government distributed flour through relief programs, the recipe on the back of the sack included a simple soup: brown flour in butter until it smells like toasted nuts, Add water slowly, stirring to prevent lumps. Season with salt and pepper. That was the entire recipe. It sounds impossible, but the toasting creates a nutty depth that transforms plain water into something that tastes almost like gravy. Families with nothing, absolutely nothing, could still make this. The recipe disappeared when the flour sacks did, but the technique still works, and it still costs almost nothing. Garlic broth was peasant food to those who had plenty, but medicine to those who had nothing. 40 cloves of garlic, a bay leaf, sage, a drizzle of olive oil, and water. Simmer for 30 minutes, then strain. During the Depression, garlic was considered peasant food, something Italian and Greek immigrants relied on when money ran out. The broth was believed to cure colds, settle stomachs, and restore strength after illness. Modern research supports nearly all of those folk claims. Allicin, the compound released when garlic is crushed, has documented antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. For a senior living alone through flu season, a pot of garlic broth is medicine and supper in the same bowl. Buttermilk soup across the rural South and Midwest was a summer staple served cold. It was simple. Buttermilk, crumbled cornbread, diced onion, salt, pepper, mixed in a bowl and eaten with a spoon. It sounds strange, but the tangy buttermilk and the crumbly cornbread created something cool and filling on days when the kitchen was too hot to light the stove. Buttermilk cost almost nothing during the Depression because it was the byproduct of butter making, practically a waste product. For seniors who struggle with appetite in the heat, cold buttermilk soup is a forgotten answer that requires no cooking at all. Bone marrow soup was something butchers gave away freely because nobody asked for the bones. Housewives roasted the bones until the marrow turned golden, then simmered them for hours with onion, celery, and a splash of vinegar to draw out the minerals. The result was a broth so rich it felt like a meal on its own. Calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, collagen, all leached into the water. Modern bone broth companies charge $8 a carton for what Depression grandmothers made for free. A senior living alone can ask any butcher for marrow bones today. Most will still give them away or charge almost nothing. Peanut butter soup shocks people, but it was a real Depression staple with roots in West African and Southern cooking that go back centuries. Sauté diced onion and celery. Add a quart of broth or water. Stir in 3 tablespoons of peanut butter until dissolved. Season with salt and a pinch of cayenne. The peanut butter melts into a creamy, protein-rich soup that tastes nothing like a sandwich and everything like comfort. George Washington Carver promoted peanut soup as a nutritious, affordable meal for poor families across the South. A jar of peanut butter and a few vegetables become 3 days of soup for one person. Poor man's potato and onion soup with a poached egg was the Depression supper that could be made in 15 minutes with ingredients that cost almost nothing. Dice 2 potatoes and 1 onion. Simmer in salted water until tender. Then crack an egg directly into the simmering broth and let it poach for 3 minutes. The egg white sets around the yolk, creating a protein-rich centerpiece floating in a starchy, savory broth. Ladle everything into a bowl. The yolk breaks open like liquid gold, enriching every spoonful. For a senior eating alone, this is a complete meal. Protein, carbohydrate, vitamins, all in one bowl from one pot in a quarter of an hour. No recipe book needed, no special ingredients. Just a potato, an onion, an egg, and the quiet wisdom of a generation that knew how to turn almost nothing into something worth sitting down for. And now the last one, the most important one, stone soup, not the fairy tale, the real thing. During the Depression, families in rural communities across America practiced a version of stone soup without calling it that. One neighbor brought an onion, another brought a carrot, a third brought a potato. Someone had a bone, someone else had salt. Alone, none of them had enough for a meal. Together they made a pot of soup that fed everyone. The stone was not magic. The community was. For seniors living alone today, this is the most important recipe on this list. Not because of the ingredients, but because of what it really means. You do not have to eat alone. A pot of soup is an invitation. It always has been. It always will be. When you make one of these soups, you are not just feeding yourself. You're keeping alive something that has fed millions. You are honoring your grandmother. You are saying yes to life, even when life feels small and quiet and alone. I am 92 years old now. I have watched the world change in ways I never expected. But I know this. The wisdom in these soups, the care in these recipes, the love in this way of eating, that never changes. It never gets old. It never loses its power. These soups kept my grandmother alive. They kept my mother alive. They kept me alive. And they can keep you alive too. They can feed you. They can warm you. They can remind you that you matter, that your life is worth nourishing. That someone sometime loved this world enough to figure out how to turn almost nothing into everything. So I'm asking you, please try one of these this week. Just one. Try the potato soup. Try the egg drop soup. Try the bean bone soup. Then come back and tell me which one your grandmother used to make. Tell me if the flour sack soup surprised you. Tell me if the peanut butter soup made you a believer. Share with me which one you are going to make next. Because these were not just soups, they were survival. They were dignity on a dime. They were proof that even when the world falls apart, a warm bowl and a little wisdom can hold a person together. And please, if this matters to you, if this feeling of being cared for matters, if the knowledge of your grandmother's strength matters, then subscribe to this channel. Keep this old wisdom alive. Do not let it disappear like it almost did with me. Your grandmother knew. Now you know too. Now you. And soon you can teach someone else. That is how we keep the love going.